Hi, I'm Patricia, and I'm 52 years old. I work as a financial advisor at a small firm in Portland, Oregon, where I help people plan for their biggest life moments: weddings, homes, retirement. I understand the weight of money, the sacrifices it takes to save, and the trust required when someone asks you to help them achieve their dreams. What I'm about to tell you is a story of how my greatest act of generosity was betrayed in the most selfish way imaginable, and how I learned that some people will take your kindness and twist it into something that serves only themselves. You know that feeling when you've spent months carefully setting aside money for someone else's happiness? When you've made sacrifices to help someone you love create the perfect memory? Well, I experienced the complete opposite of gratitude when I discovered that my daughter Amy had used the $5,000 I'd saved for her honeymoon to take a solo trip to Bali. And when confronted, she simply said, "I needed peace." Let me tell you the whole story, because this isn't just about money. This is about trust, about family bonds, and about the moment I realized that my daughter had become someone I didn't recognize, someone who could take my love and generosity and reshape it into something that had nothing to do with the purpose for which it was given. It all started 8 months before Amy's wedding, when she and her fiancé Jake were stressing about their budget. They'd found the perfect venue, chosen the dress, booked the photographer, but when it came to their honeymoon, the numbers just weren't adding up. They dreamed of going to Italy, exploring the Amalfi Coast, staying in romantic little hotels overlooking the Mediterranean. But after all the wedding expenses, they were looking at either a drastically scaled-back trip or no honeymoon at all. I remember the evening Amy called me, her voice heavy with disappointment. "Mom, we might just have to skip the honeymoon and save up for next year. By the time we pay for everything else, there's just nothing left." My heart broke for her. Your wedding day should be perfect, but those first days as newlyweds, those are precious too. The honeymoon isn't just a vacation. It's the beginning of your married life together, the first adventure you take as husband and wife. I couldn't bear the thought of Amy and Jake starting their marriage with the stress of debt or the disappointment of a missed opportunity. "What if I helped?" I found myself saying. "What if I started putting money aside for your honeymoon? A wedding gift from me to help you two start your marriage with something beautiful to look forward to." The excitement in Amy's voice was immediate and infectious. "Mom, really? Would you do that? That would be incredible." And so began the most painful financial betrayal of my life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the months of sacrifice that followed, and how I managed to save every penny that Amy would eventually spend on herself alone. After I made that promise to Amy, I went home and did what I do best. I created a financial plan. To save $5,000 in 8 months, I needed to set aside $625 every month. For someone in my position, that wasn't impossible, but it would require significant lifestyle changes and careful budgeting. I started by cutting every non-essential expense I could think of. My weekly coffee shop visits became home-brewed coffee in a travel mug. My subscription to the gym became morning walks in the neighborhood. Date nights at restaurants became home-cooked meals with candles on my dining room table. I canceled my cable package, downgraded my phone plan, and started shopping exclusively at discount grocery stores. The biggest sacrifice was my annual vacation. For the past 10 years, I'd taken a week-long trip somewhere beautiful. Nothing extravagant, but a chance to recharge and explore somewhere new. That year, I canceled my planned trip to Colorado and put that entire vacation budget toward Amy's honeymoon fund instead. I also picked up extra clients at work, staying late to handle financial consultations and investment planning that would normally go to my colleagues. The additional income helped, but it meant working 10-hour days instead of 8, and often bringing paperwork home on weekends. Every month, I would transfer exactly $625 into a separate savings account that I'd labeled Amy's Honeymoon.
Watching that balance grow felt incredibly satisfying. Each deposit represented another month of sacrifice, another step closer to giving my daughter the perfect start to her married life. Amy was so grateful during those months. She'd call me every few weeks to update me on their honeymoon planning, sharing photos of hotels they were considering and restaurants they wanted to try. She and Jake had decided on the Amalfi Coast, after all, a 10-day trip that would include Rome, Naples, and several coastal towns. "Mom, I can't believe you're doing this for us. This is going to be the most incredible honeymoon. Jake keeps saying he can't wait to start taking pictures to show you when we get back." Those conversations made every sacrifice feel worthwhile. When I was eating peanut butter sandwiches for lunch instead of going out with my colleagues, I'd think about Amy and Jake exploring ancient Roman ruins. When I was working late on a Friday night instead of meeting friends for happy hour, I'd imagine them watching the sunset over the Mediterranean. By the time Amy's wedding was 3 months away, I had successfully saved $4,000. I was on track to reach the full $5,000 with time to spare. I felt proud of what I had accomplished, proud of the gift I was giving my daughter and soon-to-be son-in-law. But during those final months before the wedding, I started noticing changes in Amy that should have warned me about what was coming. She seemed more stressed than excited, more focused on perfection than on joy. And she had started making comments about needing space and time to think that didn't quite make sense for someone about to embark on a romantic honeymoon with her new husband.
2 months before the wedding, Amy's behavior started shifting in ways that made me uncomfortable, though I couldn't quite put my finger on what was wrong. She'd become obsessed with every detail of the wedding planning, calling me multiple times a day to discuss flower arrangements, seating charts, and menu changes that seemed increasingly minor. "Mom, do you think the ivory napkins look too yellow next to the white plates?" she'd ask, her voice tight with anxiety. "Maybe we should switch to white napkins, but then they might clash with the tablecloth. What do you think?" I'd try to reassure her that everything would be beautiful, that guests wouldn't notice small details like napkin colors. But she seemed incapable of letting anything go. Every decision became a crisis. Every choice became a source of stress rather than excitement. More concerning were the comments she'd started making about Jake. Not complaints exactly, but observations that suggested she was having doubts about their relationship. "Jake doesn't really understand how important the aesthetic details are," she'd say. "He keeps telling me it's just one day and that people won't remember the centerpieces. But I feel like if he doesn't care about these things now, what does that say about how he'll approach other important moments in our life together?" I'd remind her that men often approach wedding planning differently, that Jake's lack of interest in floral arrangements didn't mean he didn't care about their marriage. But Amy seemed to be interpreting every difference of opinion as a fundamental incompatibility. The honeymoon planning, which had been a source of joy for months, started becoming another point of contention. Amy began questioning whether 10 days in Italy was too long, whether they should consider somewhere closer to home, whether they'd have enough to talk about during such an extended trip together. "What if we get bored?" she asked during one of our conversations. "What if we run out of things to do? Or worse, what if we realize we don't actually enjoy traveling together?" These weren't the concerns of an excited bride-to-be. These were the words of someone who was questioning fundamental aspects of her relationship. But whenever I gently suggested that maybe she needed to talk to Jake about her concerns or perhaps consider couples counseling before the wedding, Amy would immediately backtrack. No, I'm just stressed about the wedding. Once everything is planned and the day goes perfectly, I'll feel better about everything." I started wondering if the wedding stress was revealing deeper issues or if the pressure of planning such an elaborate event was creating problems that didn't actually exist. Either way, I was worried about my daughter's emotional state.
But I continued saving for the honeymoon because I believed that once the wedding stress was over, Amy and Jake would need that time together to reconnect and start their marriage on a positive note. I thought the honeymoon I was helping to fund would be exactly what they needed to remember why they'd fallen in love in the first place. I had no idea that Amy was already planning to take that trip without her husband. The wedding day itself was beautiful, though I could see the stress etched on Amy's face even as she walked down the aisle. She looked stunning in her dress, and Jake's face lit up when he saw her, but there was something rigid about Amy's smile, something forced about her joy that made me worry even as I dabbed at happy tears. The ceremony went off without a hitch. Every detail was as perfect as Amy had demanded. The ivory napkins looked lovely against the white plates, the centerpieces were elegant, and the photographer captured every moment. But throughout the reception, I noticed Amy checking her phone frequently, almost compulsively, even during her first dance with Jake. When I mentioned this to her during the mother-daughter dance, she brushed off my concern. "I'm just making sure all the vendors got paid properly," she said. "I want everything to be settled before we leave for the honeymoon tomorrow." Tomorrow. They were supposed to fly to Rome the next evening, beginning their 10-day Italian adventure. I felt a surge of satisfaction knowing that my 8 months of sacrifice had made this possible for them. The week after the wedding, I expected to hear nothing from Amy and Jake. They'd be too busy exploring ancient ruins and sipping wine on terraces overlooking the Mediterranean. So when my phone rang, 3 days after they supposedly left for Italy, and Amy's name appeared on the screen, my first thought was panic. Had something happened? Was there an emergency? "Amy, honey, what's wrong? Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Mom," she said, but her voice sounded strange, distant, and slightly guilty. "I just wanted to check in." "Check in? Aren't you supposed to be in Rome right now? Is everything all right with the trip?" There was a long pause. Too long. The kind of silence that makes your stomach drop because you know something terrible is coming. "Mom, I need to tell you something," Amy said finally. "Jake and we didn't go to Italy." "What do you mean you didn't go? Are you sick? Did something happen with the flights?" Another pause. "No, Mom, we decided not to go. Together, I mean." The words weren't making sense. "What do you mean, not together?" "Amy, what's going on?" she said quietly. "I went, but I went alone. Jake and we needed some space after the wedding. I needed time to think, to figure some things out, so I used the honeymoon money, but I went by myself." The phone felt heavy in my hand. "You used the honeymoon money? For a solo trip?" "Yes. I'm in Bali, actually. I changed the destination too. I needed somewhere more peaceful, more spiritual. Italy felt too romantic, too couple-oriented." I sat down heavily on my couch, trying to process what I was hearing. 8 months of sacrifice, $5,000, peanut butter sandwiches, and canceled vacations, and 10-hour workdays. Also, my daughter could abandon her new husband and take my gift halfway around the world by herself. "Amy," I said, my voice barely steady, "that money was for your honeymoon, with Jake, together." "I know, Mom, but I needed peace. I needed to figure out what I really want."
"What you really want?" I repeated, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "Amy, you just got married 3 days ago. You stood in front of your family and friends and made vows to Jake. What could you possibly need to figure out?" "It's complicated, Mom," she said, and I could hear the defensiveness creeping into her voice. "The wedding was so stressful, and I realized that maybe Jake and I rushed into things. Maybe we need to take a step back and really evaluate whether we're compatible long term." I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience.
This couldn't be the same daughter who had spent months excitedly planning every detail of her wedding, who had gushed about spending 10 romantic days in Italy with her new husband. So you decided to evaluate your compatibility by abandoning him and taking a solo vacation to Bali? I asked, unable to keep the disbelief out of my voice. I didn't abandon him, Amy snapped. We talked about it. Well, we thought about it actually, but ultimately we both agreed that maybe some space would be good. Amy, that money wasn't for space. It wasn't for you to go soul-searching in Bali. It was specifically for your honeymoon with Jake. Do you understand what I sacrificed to save that money? I know you worked hard to save it, Mom, and I'm grateful. Grateful? I interrupted. You're grateful? Amy, I canceled my vacation. I worked 10-hour days for 8 months. I ate peanut butter sandwiches for lunch so I could put that money aside for your honeymoon. Your honeymoon with your husband, not your personal spiritual journey. There was silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I hoped that maybe my words were getting through to her, that she was finally understanding the magnitude of what she'd done. But when she spoke again, her voice was cold and distant in a way I'd never heard before. Mom, I appreciate everything you did, but I'm an adult. I can make my own decisions about how to use money that was given to me. You gave me that money as a wedding gift, and this is how I chose to use it. I gave you that money for a specific purpose, Amy. This isn't the same thing at all. Look, she said, her tone becoming increasingly impatient. I needed this trip. I needed time to think about my life, my marriage, my future. I'm sorry if you don't approve of how I'm using your gift, but this is what I needed to do for my mental health. Mental health. She was framing her betrayal as self-care, her selfishness as emotional necessity. What about Jake's mental health? What about his feelings? What about the fact that his wife of 3 days just abandoned him to go halfway around the world to find herself? Jake will be fine, she said dismissively. He understands that I need this time. But I could hear something in her voice that suggested Jake understood no such thing. I suspected that Jake was at home, confused and heartbroken, wondering what had gone so wrong that his new wife had chosen to spend their honeymoon money on a solo trip to Bali to find herself. Amy, I said, my voice heavy with disappointment, this isn't who you are. This isn't the daughter I raised. Maybe it is, Mom. Maybe this is exactly who I am, and you just never wanted to see it. That conversation ended with Amy hanging up on me, leaving me sitting in my living room, staring at my phone, trying to process what had just happened. My daughter, the child I had raised to be honest, considerate, and responsible, had just revealed herself to be someone I didn't recognize at all. Over the next few days, the full scope of the situation became clear. Jake called me, his voice broken and confused, asking if I knew why Amy had suddenly decided she needed to find herself in Bali instead of celebrating their marriage in Italy. She left 2 days after the wedding. She said she realized during the reception that she wasn't ready to be married, that she needed time to figure out if she'd made a mistake. She took the honeymoon money and just left. My heart broke for this sweet young man who had done nothing wrong except marry my selfish daughter. I apologized to him for Amy's behavior, though I knew that it wasn't my place to apologize for another adult's choices. Jake, I said, that money was meant for both of you, for your honeymoon together. What Amy did was wrong, and I'm so sorry you're going through this. Amy stayed in Bali for 3 weeks, posting Instagram photos of herself at yoga retreats and meditation sessions, always alone, always captioned with phrases about finding inner peace and discovering authentic self. Meanwhile, Jake was left to deal with wedding vendors asking about final payments, return gifts from guests who were confused about what had happened, and the humiliation of explaining to friends and family that his wife had left him days after their wedding. When Amy finally returned, she and Jake tried counseling, but the damage was too deep. How do you rebuild trust with someone who abandons you at the most vulnerable moment in your relationship? How do you forgive someone who uses money meant to celebrate your union to instead question whether that union should even exist? They separated 6 months later and divorced within the year. Amy never apologized for how she used my money. In fact, she seemed to believe that her journey of self-discovery had been necessary and justified. She moved to California, started a wellness blog, and regularly posts about the importance of putting yourself first and not letting others' expectations control your choices. I learned something important from this experience. Generosity without boundaries isn't love, it's enabling. When we give to people who don't respect the spirit of our gifts, we're not helping them. We're teaching them that they can take advantage of our kindness without consequences. I still love Amy, but I no longer finance her life choices. When she asked me to help with the deposit for her California apartment, I said no. When she needed money for a certification course for her wellness business, I declined, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. My $5,000 taught Amy that she could take my sacrifices and reshape them to serve her own desires. I decided that was the last lesson in selfishness I would fund. Some gifts are too precious to give to people who don't understand their value. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop giving to someone who only knows how to take.
Do you enjoy stories with emotion and twists? Then like, subscribe, and activate the bell. Here, every word touches you.